you say the esteemed medical journal reported the temperature rises during the past 2 decades in Canada and the US, this is in the book, and then the chapter on climate change, had meant more than 7,200 heat deaths a year from warming. But the study showed that the warming reduced cold deaths over the same period by 21,000. So,
surely both of the figures have got to be taken. And the problem with much of the media's coverage of this issue is that only the statistic that aids and abets the climate alarmism are quoted.
Quite. And why, and of course we have, you write brilliantly, we have most to lose in all of this, because by demonising coal and our resources, you say we've got vast quantities of high-grade coal, iron ore and natural gas, 38% of the world's supply of easily recoverable uranium, a net export of energy, and you said this made us different from many other wealthy developed nations. Why have we surrendered to Paris?
Well, I think these are questions that I hope increasingly people are, and is why I remain an agnostic at the very most on climate change, at very least rather on climate change. And the failure of many people to understand that the interests of Europe, even the interests of the United States on this issue are different from ours.
Quite.
We are virtually unique in being a net exporter of energy, a very highly developed, advanced country. Canada approaches us, but nowhere near as dramatically.
Well, you make this point. You say, it amazes me how ready many enthusiasts for action on climate change were to cast aside the huge advantage that Australia had in the name of joining an international consensus. Australia was being asked by other affluent nations to give up an advantage that those countries would not have been willing to forego. But who was proclaiming that on behalf of Australia?
Well, I think there's been a failure on both sides, certainly a greater failure, I would argue, on the Labor Party side, because there's been a lot more zealous, but I do accept that at the time of the last election, the coalition appeared closer to the Labor position than it had been previously, and that has to be accepted.
Costly. But see, you're talking about renewables now. That's everywhere. But you make these points in the book. That's why this chapter has got to be read. I mean, Tony Abbott, you make the point, established in 2014 the Warburton Inquiry to examine the renewable energy scheme, which concluded, you write, that the scheme was an expensive emissions abatement tool and provided an economically inefficient subsidy. I mean, 2014.
That's a fact established by a committee led by a very highly regarded Australian businessman.
Yep. And then you quote the white paper on energy of 2005, which reaffirmed the central role of cheap, reliable sources of energy in Australia's economic future. In other words, all this documentation is there.
Oh yes, there's plenty of evidentiary material that's been ignored or misapplied. And what the other argument that I would put with some passion is that if you look at countries such as India, what are they aspiring for most at the moment? They're aspiring to lift the living standards of people who are living, in our terms, in significant poverty. And how do they best do that? By generating in the cheapest possible means electricity.
That's it. That's it.
What do they need for that? They need
our coal.
Our coal.
Our coal.
And so on humanitarian grounds,
yes,
it's a very strong argument.
Well, you